Cowboy saves, freezing Apache girl with blanket, her tribe declares him her husband. The wind across the snow-swept plains didn't just howl, it screamed with the ghosts of forgotten things. This blizzard-choked emptiness was a perfect mirror for Eli's soul, a landscape exuding stark isolation, raw grief, and a brutal indifference. He spurred his horse onward, a man of pure grit, seeking an end in the heart of the storm. He was done running from the memories of a laughing wife and a small hand in his. Here, the world itself was a final welcome oblivion. But fate, a cruel card sharp, dealt him one last hand. A splash of color against the white. A girl Apache, her life fading with every shallow breath. His first instinct, cold and sharp, was to ride on. Attachments were for other men, for a life he had already buried. But as he turned to leave, her faint sigh snagged on the frozen air. And on a part of his heart he thought long dead. He was a man looking for a grave. He never expected to find a reason to live, or a new way to die. The wind was a sculptor of ghosts, carving the endless white plains into shapes of sorrow and regret. It howled a dead-language lullaby, a sound that flayed the warmth from a man's bones and scoured the hope from his soul. This was the world Eli had chosen, or the world that was left after his own had burned to ash. The blizzard was a mercy, a screaming, blinding oblivion that deafened the whispers of memory. Here, in the heart of the storm's fury, the ghosts of a laughing wife and a small daughter's hand in his could not find him. His horse, a gaunt beast named Pilgrim, shuddered beneath him, its breath pluming in frozen clouds. Easy, old boy, Eli rasped his own words, swallowed by the gale. Just a little further. Find a place to die or a place to forget, whichever comes first. He didn't care which. 5 years of running had hollowed him out, leaving a man who was little more than a vessel for grief, riding a horse toward nowhere. Then Pilgrim stopped, dead in its tracks, its ears swiveled alert. What is it? Eli squinted, his eyes raw from the wind. Through the swirling chaos he saw it, a smudge of darkness against the suffocating white. A fallen branch, maybe, a shadow on the snow. Nothing. He nudged the horse forward. It's nothing, you damn fool. But it wasn't nothing. As they drew closer, the shape resolved itself. It was a person, small, hunched against the skeletal trunk of a lone dead cottonwood. Eli's first instinct, cold and sharp as an icicle, was to turn. Not my fight, not my burden. The world was filled with dying things. Adding one more to his conscience was a weight he could no longer carry. He pulled on the reins, turning Pilgrim's head away. He had already failed the ones who mattered. He got 2 paces before a sound, thin and fragile, snagged on the wind and pierced the armor around his heart. A soft moan. The sound of a life not yet extinguished but clinging by a thread. He froze. The image hit him then, unbidden and brutal. A small bed in a dusty room, a tiny body burning with fever, the same shallow, rattling breaths. Lily, his daughter. He had sat by her side, helpless, holding her hand as her life slipped away like smoke. He had been powerless then. A man made of useless love and desperate prayers. Damn it all to hell, he swore the curse, a ragged prayer. He slid from the saddle, his boots sinking into the deep snow. He approached the figure, his heart a leaden drum against his ribs. It was a girl. Apache by the look of her thin buckskin dress and the single feather tied into her long black hair. She couldn't have been more than 17 or 18. Her face was ashen, her lips a terrifying shade of blue. She was dying. Right here, right in front of him. "Hey," he said gruffly, his voice lost in the wind. He knelt, his gloved hand hovering over her shoulder before he touched her. The cold that radiated from her was profound, the cold of life giving way. Her eyes fluttered open, dark and clouded with delirium, and for a heart-stopping moment he saw not a stranger but Lily's eyes looking up at him in her final moments. He recoiled, as if burned. This was a ghost from a fresh grave sent to torment him. He had to do something. The helplessness, that old familiar poison, threatened to paralyze him. But this time was different. He couldn't stop a fever, but he could fight the cold. He strode back to Pilgrim, his movements jerky and desperate. He fumbled with the ties on his saddle roll, his numb fingers clumsy. He pulled it free, a heavy, thick wool blanket, deep blue with cream-colored stripes. Sarah's blanket. The one she had spent a whole winter weaving, the one she had wrapped around Lily during cold nights. His last tangible piece of them. It still smelled faintly of her, of wood smoke and dried lavender. "Sarah, forgive me." He carried it back to the girl, a sacred offering in a desolate temple of ice. He knelt again, his movements now gentle, sure. He carefully wrapped the thick wool around her, tucking it under her chin, cocooning her in its warmth. The warmth of his past. The warmth of a life he had lost. There, he whispered, though she couldn't hear. "It's not much, but it's all I've got." He stood looking down at the small, dark blue mound in the snow. He had done it. He had interfered. He had given away his last ghost to a stranger who would likely be dead by morning anyway. A profound emptiness, colder and deeper than the blizzard, settled over him. Without a backward glance, he mounted Pilgrim and rode on, leaving the blanket and the life it represented behind. He found shelter hours later in a shallow cave, the entrance shielded by a curtain of ice. The fire he built seemed to give off no heat, its light only serving to make the shadows dance like mocking specters. He did not sleep. He stared into the flames and saw only a pair of dark, delirious eyes. He had survived, but he wondered with a strange and terrifying ache if he had just condemned himself in a way he never thought possible. Had she lived? Had she died? As the first pale fingers of dawn stretched across the sky, the storm finally broke. The world was born anew, silent and pristine under a blanket of fresh snow. Eli stepped out of the cave, his body aching, his soul weary. He looked back the way he came. His tracks from yesterday were faint but visible, and then he saw them, far in the distance, emerging from the line of broken hills. A new set of tracks. Riders. A dozen of them. Their dark shapes were stark against the rising sun, and they were moving with a silent, deliberate purpose. They were moving straight for him. They did not ride like a war party. A war party screamed and charged a chaotic wave of violence. These men rode like judgment. Silent. Inevitable. Their ponies kicked up soft plumes of snow, the only sound in the vast, echoing stillness of the new morning. 12 of them, their faces impassive, their eyes dark and fixed on him. Eli stood his ground by the dead fire, a solitary figure against the endless white. His hand rested on the worn grip of his Colt, not out of any real hope, but from a lifetime of habit. The gesture was a prayer to a god of iron and smoke he no longer believed in. A dozen of them. One of him. The math was simple, brutal, and final. So this is it. He thought, a strange calm settling over him. A lonely patch of snow to be my grave. It was almost a relief. The running was over. They formed a perfect silent circle around him, their lances and unstrung bows held patiently. They were not here for a fight. They were here for a reckoning. The air grew thick with unspoken words, with the weight of their purpose. A full minute passed. Then another. The only movement was the steam from their horses' nostrils. Then the circle parted. 2 figures dismounted and walked toward him, their steps measured and deliberate in the deep snow. The first was the leader, a man of immense stature and dignity. His face was a mask of weathered authority etched with lines of grief and command, a single eagle feather braided into his long, gray-streaked hair. The other was an old man, thin and frail as a winter branch, but his eyes held the sharp, clear wisdom of 100 seasons. The chief, for he could be nothing else, stopped a few paces away. He looked at Eli, his gaze piercing, holding no malice, only an intense, unnerving scrutiny. He spoke, his voice a low rumble, the words ancient and powerful in his native tongue. The elder stepped forward. His English was slow, heavily accented, each word chosen with care. Chief Brave Heart asks if you are the man who walked in the heart of the great storm yesterday. Eli's throat was dry. He managed a single sharp nod. I am. You found a daughter of the Red Mountain people, the elder stated, not a question. Her spirit was being claimed by the ice. She was freezing, Eli confirmed, his voice a low rasp. I gave her a blanket. He said the words plainly, a simple confession before his executioners. A low murmur went through the warriors. Chief Braveheart spoke again, his tone softer this time, edged with something Eli couldn't decipher. The elder translated. The girl you found is Tala. She is the only daughter of our chief. My warriors found her at the base of the cottonwood. The blanket you gave her, it held her soul to her body. She lives. For a fleeting second, a wave of impossible relief washed over Eli. She was alive. The foolish, desperate act had not been in vain. The relief was a foreign feeling, a warmth he had not allowed himself in years. He thought foolishly that this was the end of it. There's no need for thanks, he said quickly. I'm just glad the girl is all right. The elder held up a hand, his expression turning grave. The air grew still once more. It is more than thanks, white man. The blanket. He paused, letting the words settle. It was not a common covering. It carried the scent of your lodge, the spirit of your life. It was a great gift. It was my wife's. Eli heard himself say the words escaping like traitors. A look of profound understanding passed over the chief's face. He spoke a long, solemn sentence. The elder closed his eyes for a moment, as if gathering the weight of the words before passing them on. When he spoke again, his voice was the sound of destiny locking into place. In the laws of our people, passed down from the first ancestors, when a man finds an unmarried woman at the edge of the spirit world and covers her, protects her with his own sacred lodge skin, he is making a vow. You wrapped her in the warmth of your past life to give her a new one. This is the way. It is the holiest of our rites. The elder's dark eyes locked with Eli's. It is the blanket vow. Eli stared, his mind struggling to catch up. The words made no sense. The what I don't understand. It was just a piece of wool. I was trying to keep her from dying. Kindness is the seed of the vow, the elder replied patiently, as if explaining the sun to a blind man. And your seed has taken root. You did not just save her body. You claimed her spirit as your own to protect. She lived because of your vow. The spirits have accepted it. He took a deep breath. By our law, you are her husband. The world tilted. The vast white landscape seemed to rush in on Eli, suffocating him. Husband. The word was a gunshot in the silent theater of his mind. He wanted to laugh, to scream, to tell them they were insane. But one look at the solemn, unyielding face of Chief Brave Heart, at the quiet certainty in the eyes of the warriors, told him this was no misunderstanding. This was a truth as solid and as real as the frozen ground beneath his feet. No, Eli whispered, shaking his head. No, you've got it all wrong. That's not... It was just an act. A decent act. It meant nothing more. It meant life. The elder said, his voice final. And life is never nothing. Chief Braveheart stepped forward and placed a hand on his own chest, then extended it toward Eli. A gesture not of aggression, but of acceptance. Of family. The warriors relaxed their stances, their weapons lowering. The circle broke, not to release him, but to reform into a procession. They gestured for him to retrieve his horse. He was to ride with them. He moved in a daze, his limbs heavy, his mind reeling. He was not a prisoner yet, he was utterly captive. He was not being threatened, yet his life was no longer his own. He had spent 5 years running from the ghost of one marriage only to be snared in the unbreakable chains of another. The blanket had saved her life. He was beginning to think it had just cost him his. The journey to the Apache camp was a silent procession through a world reborn. The sun, a stranger the day before, now cast long, sharp shadows from the towering red rock formations that rose from the snow like the bones of sleeping giants. Eli rode in the center of the warrior escort, a man adrift in a river of purpose he could not comprehend. He was not their prisoner, yet every stoic glance from the riders was a bar on his cage. This was their land, their world, a place that operated on laws as ancient and unforgiving as the stone around them. The camp was nestled in a hidden valley, shielded from the wind and the eyes of the world. It was not the chaotic, savage picture painted in back-alley whispers and dime novels. It was a place of life. The air smelled of wood smoke, roasting meat and pine. Lodges made of hide and timber stood in a great circle, their entrances facing the rising sun. Children, bundled in furs, chased each other with shrieks of laughter while women worked together, their hands skilled and sure as they scraped hides or ground corn. It was a community, a world, turning on an axis of tradition and survival that he did not understand. He was led to the largest lodge, that of Chief Braveheart. The warriors dismounted, their silence returning as their chief entered the dwelling. Eli remained on his horse, an island of uncertainty in a sea of quiet observation. Then the flap of the lodge was pushed aside and she emerged. Tala. She was no longer the half-frozen wretch from the storm. The deathly blue on her lips had been replaced by a healthy flush, her dark eyes clear and luminous. She was wrapped in a thick buffalo robe, but beneath it he could see she held herself with a quiet, powerful grace. She looked at him, and in her gaze he saw a maelstrom of emotions that mirrored his own confusion, fear, and a sliver of something else. A deep, questioning gratitude. She was the architect of his cage and its prisoner all at once. Before he could process the silent exchange, a new figure stepped into the space between them. He was a warrior, tall and broad-shouldered, his face a mask of simmering rage. A jagged scar ran down his left cheek, and his eyes, black and hard as obsidian, were fixed on Eli with undisguised hatred. He spoke, his voice a low, guttural snarl, jabbing a finger toward Eli. The elder who had remained nearby stepped forward, his face troubled. "This is Black Eagle," he said, his voice low. "He is our fiercest warrior. Tala, she was promised to his lodge." Of course, Eli thought a bitter humor twisting in his gut, as if this wasn't complicated enough. Black Eagle spat a string of harsh, venomous words. "He says the white man's spirit is weak," the elder translated, his voice heavy. "He says you have the heart of a coyote who steals from another's trap. He says you used a woman's trick, a blanket, to claim what you could not win with a warrior's strength." The elder paused, his gaze meeting Eli's. "He warns you that a shadow cannot long survive in the full sun. He sees you as a shadow." The threat was as sharp and real as a knife's edge. Chief Braveheart emerged from his lodge, then his presence immediately calming the tension. He spoke firmly to Black Eagle, who glared one last time at Eli before stalking away his anger, a physical presence that lingered in the cold air. "You will be given a lodge," the elder informed Eli. "You are a guest and the husband of the chief's daughter. You are protected. For now." Eli was shown to a small empty lodge at the edge of the camp. An outsider's lodge. He sat on the packed earth floor, the weight of the last 24 hours crushing him. He was trapped. Trapped by a bizarre custom, trapped by the gratitude of a chief, and now trapped by the hatred of a spurned warrior. The urge to flee, to simply mount Pilgrim and ride until the world ran out, was a physical ache. As he sat there staring into the dying light, the ghosts he'd been running from found him with ease. Sarah's face appeared in the shifting firelight, her eyes asking a question he could not answer. He had failed to protect her. He had failed to protect Lily, and now fate had handed him another woman to be responsible for a woman whose life he had inadvertently thrown into chaos and danger. He was a walking curse. A shadow fell across the entrance of his lodge. He looked up, his hand instinctively going to his hip. It was Tala. She stood there for a moment, hesitant. Then she stepped inside, carrying a wooden bowl of steaming stew and a skin of fresh water. She did not speak. She did not look him in the eye. She simply knelt and placed the offering on the ground before him, a silent, profound gesture. Then, just as quietly, she rose and left. Eli stared at the bowl. The steam rising from it carried the scent of wild herbs and roasted rabbit. It was a simple act of kindness, an act of care, and it broke through the wall of his self-pity like a battering ram. For the first time, he saw her not as a problem, not as the source of his predicament, but as a person. A young woman just as trapped as he was, who chose to show grace to the stranger who had ruined her life. That night, sleep would not come. He lay in the darkness, listening to the alien sounds of the camp. Every snap of a twig, every distant cry of a nightbird could be Black Eagle coming to claim his vengeance. He thought of the open plains. He could be gone by sunrise, vanish back into the wilderness, back into his chosen oblivion. But then he saw Tala's face. He saw her leaving the stew at his feet, and he saw the venom in Black Eagle's eyes. To run now would be to abandon her to the fury of a man he had wronged. It would be a death sentence delivered by his own cowardice. He had come to these wastes to finally bury his ghosts. He never imagined fate would hand him a new one to protect. He closed his eyes not to sleep, but to face the long, cold truth. Running was no longer an option. His cage had a name, and her name was Tala. The sun rose on a world of sharp edges and cold clarity. The tension in the camp was a living thing, a coiled serpent in their midst. It was in the way the warriors watched Eli, the way the women fell silent as he passed. He was an anomaly, a disruption to their ancient rhythm, a white man bound by a vow he didn't understand. Chief Braveheart summoned him before his lodge as the morning frost still clung to the earth. Black Eagle stood at the chief's side, his arms crossed, a look of smug contempt on his scarred face. The spirits have accepted the vow. The elder began, his voice a slow, deliberate cadence. But the law of spirits is not the only law. There is the law of man, the law of survival. The chief spoke, his voice firm as the mountain stone. He says the elder translated that a husband is more than a name spoken by the wind. A husband is a provider. His hands must be strong enough to feed his lodge, to care for the daughter of the chief. Your worth, Eli, must be proven not by accident, but by deed. Eli met the chief's gaze, his own jaw set. What do you want from me? You will hunt, the elder declared. The great stag of the high ridges. Its meat is needed for the winter stores. Its hide is needed for the lodges. You will bring this prize back to the camp. You will prove you are a man who provides. A murmur of approval went through the small crowd that had gathered. This was a true test. The high ridges were treacherous, and the great stags were like phantoms wise to the ways of men. He will not go alone, the elder added, a grim note entering his voice. Black Eagle will accompany him, to ensure he follows the ways of our people. Eli looked at Black Eagle. The warrior's smile was thin and cruel. This was not an honor guard. It was a sentence. He was being sent into the wilderness with his own executioner. As he prepared, he was stripped of his own familiar tools. His rifle, a heavy Winchester that felt like an extension of his own arm, was taken and stored. In its place, he was given an Apache bow, beautifully made but utterly alien in his hands, and a quiver of arrows. He was a master of the long gun, a patient marksman. This was a different language of hunting a different world. He stood by his horse, the bow feeling clumsy and foreign when Tala approached. The camp seemed to fade away as she walked toward him. She did not speak. She simply held out her hand. In her palm lay a single, perfect arrow. It was different from the others in his quiver. The arrowhead was not of common flint, but of a dark, polished obsidian that seemed to drink the light. The fletching was from the tail feather of a golden eagle. It was a weapon of immense power and a work of art. A chief's arrow. She placed it in his hand. Her fingers brushed against his a touch as light as a moth's wing, yet it sent a jolt through him. Their eyes met, and in that silent glance 1,000 words were spoken. Be safe, be strong, come back. He gave a short, almost imperceptible nod and slid the arrow into his quiver, a secret promise between them. The high country was a brutal paradise. For 2 days they tracked, or rather Eli tracked. Black Eagle followed a silent, mocking shadow. The warrior's sabotage was an art form, subtle and infuriating. When Eli crept close to a promising trail, a branch would snap accidentally under Black Eagle's foot. When the wind was in Eli's favor, Black Eagle would find a reason to move upwind his scent, poisoning the air. The white man walks like a deaf bear. Black Eagle would sneer in his own tongue, knowing Eli would understand the tone if not the words. The deer can hear his clumsy heart beating from a mile away. Eli ignored him. He fell back on the one thing that had kept him alive for years, a profound, all-consuming patience. He let Black Eagle have his petty victories. He slowed his own breathing, matching it to the rhythm of the wind. He stopped looking for tracks and started looking for the story the land was telling: a bent blade of grass, a dislodged pebble, the nervous chatter of a squirrel. He became a ghost, his senses stretching out, weaving themselves into the fabric of the wilderness. On the 3rd day, as the sun began its descent, his patience was rewarded. There, on a distant ledge across a deep ravine, stood the great stag. It was a magnificent creature, its antlers a crown of ivory against the bruised purple of the twilight sky. It was too far. The angle was impossible. A shot with a rifle would be difficult. With a bow, it was a fool's hope. Black Eagle laughed a harsh, triumphant sound. The mountain spirit protects its own. The white man will return with empty hands. His vow is empty. Eli did not listen. He closed his eyes, his mind clearing of everything but the stag, the wind, and the distance. He remembered the feel of Tala's fingers on his, the weight of the special arrow. He had one chance. He slowly pulled the obsidian-tipped arrow from his quiver. It felt different in his hand. Balanced. Alive. He knocked it to the string, his movements fluid and unhurried. He drew the bowstring back, his muscles screaming in protest. The world narrowed to the space between his eye and the tip of the arrow. He held his breath, compensating for the wind, the drop. And then he let it fly. The arrow hissed through the air, a black streak against the dying light. For a long, agonizing moment it seemed to hang in the air. Then it dropped, arcing perfectly, and struck the stag high on the shoulder. The great beast staggered, fell to its knees, and then collapsed. Its reign over the high ridges ended. Silence. The only sound was the wind, which now seemed to whisper a different name. Eli lowered the bow, his entire body trembling with exhaustion and adrenaline. He looked at Black Eagle. The warrior's face was a mask of stunned disbelief, his arrogance shattered, replaced by a raw, murderous fury. The return to camp was silent. When they arrived, dragging the massive stag behind them, a ripple of awe went through the tribe. The children stared. The women murmured. The warriors nodded a quiet, profound gesture of respect. Eli had not just brought meat. He had brought a legend. He had done the impossible. He had passed the test. He stood before Chief Braveheart, covered in dirt and sweat, his body aching, but his head held high. He had proven his worth. But as he glanced across the firelight, his eyes met Black Eagle's. The warrior was staring at him, and there was no respect in that gaze, only the cold promise of death. Eli had won the hunt. But he knew with a chilling certainty that he had just made his true enemy more dangerous than ever. The test was over. The war for his life had just begun. The victory of the hunt was a fleeting thing, a brief warmth extinguished by a new creeping cold. It came not as a blizzard, but as a fever. A sickness fell upon the camp like a silent, invisible shroud, stealing the laughter from the children first. They grew listless, their bodies burning with a fire that no medicine from the tribe's shaman could quench. It was a ghost wearing a new face. Eli watched from the entrance of his lodge as a mother keened softly over her sick child, and the familiar iron grip of helplessness seized him. The same pale faces, the same shallow, rattling breaths, the same slow, inexorable slide into the shadows. It was Lily's fever all over again. He had stood by once a statue of grief and watched his world die. He would not do it again. He found Chief Braveheart standing by the central fire, his face a mask of granite, hiding a father's fear for his people. The elder stood beside him. "Tell him," Eli began, his voice low and urgent, foregoing any formality. "Tell him I have seen this before. It is not an evil spirit born of the air. It is a poison born in the water." The shaman, a wizened man, decorated with bone and feather, overheard and spat a harsh reply. "The white man knows nothing of the spirits of the stagnant creek," the elder translated. "They are angry. Then we kill those spirits with fire." Eli countered, his gaze locked on the chief. "Boil the water, all of it, before anyone drinks. And there is a tree, one with bark like a weeping woman." He described the willow tree. Its bark holds a tea that fights the fire within. Doubt warred with fear on the chief's face. To trust this outsider was to question their own ancient ways, their own medicine man. It was then that Tala stepped forward. She had been listening from the entrance of her father's lodge. "Father," she said in her own tongue, her voice clear and steady. His arrow flew true when no other could. His spirit saw the great stag. Perhaps his spirit also sees the truth of this sickness. She turned to Eli and for the first time spoke to him in broken, halting English. "I will help. Show me this tree." Her trust was a shield. With the chief's reluctant consent, a new order was given. The camp became a flurry of activity. Fires were stoked, pots of water set to boil. Tala became Eli's hands, and his voice guiding him to the willow grove, her knowledge of the land meshing with his forgotten memories of old remedies. They worked together, a strange pair bound by a sickness and a vow, crushing the bark, preparing the bitter tea. In their shared purpose, the space between them shrank. He was no longer just the stranger who had trapped her. He was a man fighting desperately to save her people. But as hope began to kindle, jealousy festered. Black Eagle watched from the shadows, his face a thunder cloud of rage. He saw the respect in the people's eyes as they looked at Eli. He saw the trust in Tala's face as she worked by his side. It was an unbearable theft of his honor, his future. He made his move as Eli and Tala knelt beside the sickest child, the shaman's own grandson. Eli held a small cup of the willow bark tea to the boy's lips. The lodge flap was thrown open with violent force. Black Eagle stood there, his eyes blazing with righteous fury. "He poisons him," the warrior roared, striding into the lodge. "This is the white man's sorcery. He weakens our children with his water curse, only to play the savior and steal the heart of the tribe." He lunged forward, not at Eli, but at the cup, knocking it from his hands. The precious tea spilled into the dirt floor. "I will not let you feed our future to a demon." Black Eagle snarled, placing himself between Eli and the sick child. The boy let out a weak, painful cry. The air in the lodge grew thick, heavy with an impossible choice. Outside, the people gathered, their faces torn between fear of the new and faith in the old. Eli rose slowly, his body weary, but his spirit a pillar of iron. He was not the helpless man by Lily's bedside anymore. He met Black Eagle's hateful gaze, but he spoke to the chief who stood frozen in the doorway. "His medicine is fear," Eli said, his voice ringing with a newfound authority. "Mine is a simple hope." He pointed to the spilled tea, then to the sick child. "You must choose which one you will let your grandson drink." A life hung in the balance, and with it, the fate of two worlds resting on the shoulders of one old chief. The air in the lodge was thick with the silence of a held breath. A life hung suspended between two worlds, between the poison of fear and the bitter medicine of hope. Chief Braveheart's gaze moved from the furious proud face of Black Eagle to the weary resolute face of the white man. Then his eyes rested on his grandson, whose small chest rose and fell in shallow, ragged waves. The chief's voice, when it came, was not a shout, but a low, quiet thunder that shook the foundations of the lodge. The elder translated his own voice filled with a solemn gravity. "Fear is a sickness of its own. My grandson will not drink it." He turned his gaze cold as a winter river upon Black Eagle. "You have let hatred cloud your eyes until you can no longer see the difference between a healer and a hunter. You offered us venom when we needed a cure. Your spirit is no longer welcome at this fire." He gave a sharp, almost imperceptible nod. Two warriors stepped forward and took Black Eagle by the arms. The disgraced warrior said nothing, his face a mask of stunned disbelief as he was led out of the lodge and into a new life of exile. The chief looked at Eli. There was a long, heavy pause, then a single command. "Heal him." Eli knelt, his hands steady now. He lifted the new cup of willow tea Tala had prepared and gently, carefully brought it to the boy's lips. He tilted it a few precious drops, entering the child's mouth. The whole world seemed to wait. For an hour then, two, they sat in silent vigil. Then a miracle, quiet as the dawn. A single bead of sweat appeared on the boy's forehead. His breathing deepened, the rattling quieted. The fever, that raging fire, had broken. In the days that followed, a fragile hope blossomed into healing. Eli and Tala moved through the camp as one administering the boiled water and the bitter tea. The sickness receded like a sullen tide, leaving behind a community that was weak but alive. He was no longer Eli the outsider. He was Tala's husband, the water healer. He had earned his name. One evening, as the first stars appeared, the chief found him by the creek. "The debt is paid," the elder translated, his voice soft. "The law of the spirits bound you to my daughter. The law of your deeds has bound you to our people. Your honor is clean." He paused. "You are free to leave. The path is open. The vow is fulfilled." It was the ultimate test. The freedom he had craved, the escape he had dreamed of, was now offered to him on a silver platter. He could take it. He could ride away back to his ghosts and his solitude. Eli looked out at the vast empty plains, which now seemed not like freedom, but like a desolate prison. He looked back at the warm lights of the camp, at the sound of a child's healthy laughter. He saw Tala standing near her lodge, watching him, her silhouette framed against the firelight. He had come here to die. But these people, this place, they had stubbornly refused to let him. He walked back into the camp, straight to his horse. He untied the bedroll and took out the deep blue blanket. It felt different now, not a relic of a dead past, but a promise of a living future. He walked to where Tala stood. He said nothing. Words were no longer needed. In front of her father and the watchful eyes of the tribe, he unfolded the heavy wool and wrapped it around both of their shoulders, pulling her into its warmth, into his life. It was a silent answer, a vow remade not by accident or by law, but by the choosing of his own heart. The wind still whispered across the plains, but to Eli it no longer sang of ghosts. It sang of coming home.